Hello and welcome to another episode of the Empowering Leaders podcast. At Aleda, we are passionate about inspiring connections and creating a world of collaboration. Our signature program, Aleda Connect, curates groups of 5 to 6 leaders from diverse backgrounds in sport, industry, social venture and the arts who come together to learn, to connect and to collaborate.
It's been amazing. Here you are on this Zoom call, feeling within the first session like you intimately know these people and care for them. And then all of a sudden realising that even though you're in totally different industries, we're all going through the same thing, or we've been through it and we can help each other, or there's just this hurdle that you can't see past, and then you share it with the group and there's 5 answers in 40 minutes and you think, I have not slept for 2 weeks thinking about that. Like, how is this possible?
You're listening to stories and breadcrumbs of what makes success, and I constantly get something out of these Zoom calls and catch-ups because we're all living the same stuff, aren't we?
Extraordinary people with extraordinary experience. What happens there is magical.
Wil Anderson is one of the most respected voices in the entertainment world, a multiple award-winning television host, internationally respected comedian. Wil's ability to dissect complex issues, stop laughing at me, mate, with humour and intelligence has seen him sell out shows around Australia and the world. In 2008, Wil became the executive producer and host of Bruin. You're going to fact check me here on a few things. And one of the most successful shows in Australian television history. He has several outstanding podcasts, The Brilliant Philosophy, Tofop with his great mate Charlie Clausen. He's an author of 3 books, largely drawn from his brilliant writing, The Sunday Roast, published in Sunday newspapers around Australia. Co-host of Triple J's Breakfast Show with Adam Spencer, The Glass House on the ABC, and in recent times, The Brilliant Question Everything. He's fresh from doing improv shows at the Comedy Festival. He's a genius in every sense. Great to see you, mate.
Oh, mate, that was a lot of stuff. Felt like a lot of stuff.
It's the most homework I've ever done.
Yeah, it was good.
Ever.
I mean, it's rare that anybody uses the term respected in regard to me or my career, so that did make me giggle a little bit.
Do you know, as I was writing that, I thought, I know you're going to laugh, but you're a hard man to sum up. You're a hard man to capture in a paragraph or two.
Jack of all trades, master of none. That's what it is.
Well, you're a country boy from Sale in Victoria, son of dairy farmers. How young were you where you realised milking cows was not going to be your future?
Yeah, so it's funny because I examine this theme so often, and often even in my work. In fact, my last year's show, Wil Legitimate, was me going back to sort of the jokes that I would make about growing up on a farm or about my dad and these sort of things when I first started doing comedy through the eyes of somebody who is now the same age as my dad was when I started doing comedy, and whether I did see them differently. So I really went back and had a good think about, talk to mum and dad about the idea of, when did you know that I wasn't going to be a farmer? Were you very invested in the idea that I was going to be a farmer? In entertainment, they're always joking about the idea of Nepo babies, the next generation. You and I know you're from a football family, generations of footballers. It's a bit of a family tradition. Farming is a little bit like that in that often the next generation farmer comes because their parents, were involved in the farming industry in some way. But my dad, despite the fact that he's been a farmer all his life and the fact that his dad was a farmer, never really put any pressure on us, any of the kids. This is a thing that I barrack for the Bulldogs in the AFL, but my dad's a Geelong fan. Everybody else in the family, so his dad, James, and then all his kids and all their grandkids are Collingwood. Every single one of them. We were a Collingwood family. The only exception to the Collingwood family was Dad, who just decided he wanted to pick his own team and barrack for Geelong. When we were growing up, Dad said the exact same thing to us. He said, you don't have to barrack for Geelong. You all get to pick your own team. My brother barracks for Essendon. I barrack for, for the Bulldogs. My sister barracks for St Kilda. We all just chose a different team. And it was a bit like that in the way that they raised us as kids. There was always this expectation that Dad was a farmer from the age of 14 or 15 when he started farming because he wanted to be a farmer. He moved down the road to his own farm and started that when he was 15. He didn't take over the family farm. He wanted to be on the land and build a farm and have this lifestyle. And what our parents were very big on for us was that they wanted us to have those same opportunities to pursue something that we also loved or had a passion for. So my brother went back and eventually took over the family farm, and I have talked to him about it because he went off and he was a builder and he lived in London and travelled all over Europe with his friends and had that whole experience, lived in Western Australia for a while, travelled around Australia. But he did say that about every year Dad would check in and sort of say, how are you feeling? Do you think that you might come back to the farm? Never any pressure to do it, but there was a yearly check-in to see, because I mean, obviously Dad and Mum built this great big farm, like, this, family business. They were like, what happens to it when we stop doing it? Those calls never came to me. So I think from both sides, it was a mutual agreement. Like sometimes when people say things are in a mutual agreement and you're like, that doesn't really feel like it was both sides. I think this was one where we both knew that it wasn't going to be for either of us.
And I've met your brother, and he looks like the son of a farmer from Sale. And he sounded a great fella and looks like the potential that was always going to be the case. But you must look back and think, geez, that's forward thinking of your parents to be, because a lot of parents struggle with that. They just can't help but see the world through their own vision, and they want their own kids to be like them. You must be pretty respectful of that when you look back how accepting they were.
I am. You don't know that you have good parents until you meet people who haven't been as lucky. Because when you have good parents, you assume that all parents are good, or you have the luxury of looking at the things that annoy you about your parents and, pretending like they're bad things. Whereas when you grow up and you see the world and you see the great head start it can be in life, that my parents are humble parents, like, not nothing particularly flashy. We weren't particularly well off. They're farmers. They work for a living. It's a small farm. It's a family farm, all that sort of thing. But my mum had a thing that she used to say, which was like, as a parent, your responsibility is to love your kids enough that they want to stay at home until they finish school, but not love them so much that they can't go off and have their own lives and have their own adventures and build their own world. And I've always really respected that. And that certainly was the way we were raised. When you grow up on a farm, one of the more interesting things about that is, and one of the things you don't realize at the time, but you realize as you get older, is how much you see what your parents do for a living. Some kids go to work with your parents' day, and it's the first time they ever saw what it is their parents do for a living, what the office looks like, who they work with. Some kids that I know, now as adults, will say to me, the whole time I grew up, I had no idea what my dad really did. Like, I knew the name of it, whatever, but I didn't know what his day-to-day was at the office. I knew what my dad's entire job was. I knew what my mum's entire job was, because and I'm the first kid as well. So if you can imagine, like, my mum was in her early 20s. My dad was just about to turn 30, I think, when they had me, or had just turned 30 maybe when they had me. And they're both just milking on the farm, both of them every day, doing all these sort of things. So when you're a baby, it's not like they could leave me at home while they go to milk. You just get chucked in the back of the ute, and then you're in a, bassinet in the corner of the dairy when it's going on. And so often when I was growing up, particularly those early years, you're just all day in the tractor with Dad. If Dad's, mowing the hay or, baling or whatever he's doing, like, the babysitting is you sitting in the cabin with him, while he is doing that. So I got to see how my parents worked. And I do say both of them, because while my dad did the majority of the practical aspect of running the farm, a farm is a small business. So there is so much more to running a farm than milking the cows. There is the business of running a farm. And predominantly that, is what my mother did, even though both of them had roles that intersected and overcrossed and those sort of things. Mum could do practical things as well. But to see the two of them at work every day and to understand what they did, when you're a farm kid, you get very quickly incorporated into that as well. So you're not just going out with Dad while he irrigates, but you're going out and then you're being able to show, this is how you take a motorbike across an electric fence, or this is how you change the water, or this is how you milk a cow.
You don't think of a farm as small business the way you describe, and also anyone who's been in a family business. I come from a family of publicans. The mum and dad going to work together, having dinner together, doing the accounts together, that comes with a whole heap of different layers. I love that wisdom you shared. Like, your mum love your kids enough that they want to stay here till the end of school, but not too much that there's some genius in that too. Because I think, again, parents get that wrong. They were ahead of their time. You went from the farm and you ended up studying at ANU, or it was University of Canberra?
University of Canberra.
Same establishment, or is that a different?
No, they're two. So Canberra, this is the great thing about Canberra. So in retrospect, it was one of the best decisions I've ever made in my entire life, but it was made on impulse. Like, it really was. I had applied back in the day, studied journalism. The reason I studied journalism really was that when I was growing up, it felt closest to the sort of job that would satisfy the skills and interests that I had. But the truth of it is, even by then, there was a part of me in the back of my mind that had a sense of this thing, stand-up comedy, is something that I am interested in. But when you go to school in Sale and it comes to careers day, they're not sitting you down and going, you should tell dick jokes to strangers for a living. And to leave the family farm too, for all the hard work and sacrifice I knew my parents had made, because I'd been reasonably good with my education and they'd made sacrifices to send me to a good school so I could pursue that and all those sort of things, that I didn't want to, I guess, let them down in some way. So I thought, what's a good career choice that could combine these things? And so I applied to RMIT in Melbourne. I was, being a Victorian, I'd never really been anywhere else much. My dad's barely travelled interstate and he's never been out of the country, and we didn't travel like a great deal. You don't go a long way away from the farm when you're a farmer, particularly in those days. And so the idea of leaving Victoria didn't even really occur to me. I'd only just put in Canberra and Sydney as backups in case I didn't get into RMIT journalism. And I ended up getting in, and I also got a place at, I can't remember, I must have applied to just so many different backups and et ceteras. So at one stage, I'd been accepted into Monash University, into the residences there. They were telling me they had a room. RMIT was waiting for me to come down to do an interview because I got the marks, but I think there was an interview component to it. Sydney, I hadn't got into. So UTS got ruled out. They gave me a thanks but no thanks letter. And then Canberra came along. And I was making plans. I was trying to toss up between living on campus and moving in with some of my mates who were also moving down to Melbourne. And I don't know what it was. I really, to this day, can't quite tell you what it was. But there was just part of me that said, might be just time to go somewhere where you don't know anyone and that you're not influenced by who your dad was or, what your family was or who your friends are or who they think you are. Why don't you just go off somewhere else and find out who you are, make your own mistakes, try some new personalities on whatever it might be, but find out who it is that you are without all this infrastructure around you.
How old are you at this stage?
I just turned 18.
It's a pretty gutsy decision.
But as I said, impulsive. It was... It's often what I say to young people when we talk about school is this idea that if your exams haven't gone well, etc., don't worry, that if you still really want to do something, there is a way. There's always a way. You can go and study another thing, then go and do this or whatever it might be. There's various different ways you can do things. But obviously the better you go, the more options you have. And sometimes I think we pitch education to young people in the wrong ways, particularly young people who might not end up in any of the careers that they start out in, the world that we now live in. They might have, 20 or 30 jobs in their lifetime, different jobs. So and the industries that are around now might not be the industries of the future. But if you say to people, it's always better to have more options than it is to have, fewer options, then, so I guess for me, it was just that idea of I had another option. So I was able to take it. I wouldn't have been able to make that decision unless I had that other option.
But already in your mind, there was this thing that stand-up comedy is something I'm really interested in. You went on and worked as a political journo out of university. But was that in your mind? Did you think that was something you were going to be able to do?
It's funny. It was the complete opposite. So at high school, I absolutely thought it was, because you're a kid and you think you can do anything. I thought I could play AFL and I thought I could be a comedian or an actor or a director. I didn't even really know what any of those things were, but I did, high school theatre and theatre sports and all those things. And it's funny, we speak today. Literally last night I was at Hamer Hall in Melbourne and I was watching Graham Norton, the English chat show host, do a show. But I was saying to the person I was there with, I said, this is the room. This is the venue where when I was 16, 17 years old, my mum took me to see Billy Connolly and I reckon I was sitting and I was pointing out right up the back, because I remember, even where we were sitting, this is where my life changed forever.
Did mum take you because she had this sense that was a world you were going to be into, or was she a Billy Connolly fan?
So hard. I've never got a straight answer and I have asked. My mum loves the theatre. and she likes going to shows. And one of the things she liked about having kids who were interested in that, I look back on a bit of that stuff. Like I also got to watch a lot of British TV comedies earlier probably than I was probably meant to. And part of the thrill of it, the thing I liked about comedy was I was clearly being included in a world where I could only understand half the stuff, but it was so exciting and edgy. And you knew, like, there's something about that, right? In retrospect, I realize Dad used to go to bed very early because he'd have to get a milk or irrigate or whatever. Mum would often have to just sit by herself. Like, it would have been quite lonely, right?
Yeah.
Watching these shows, Graham's already in bed snoring away, listening to his wireless or whatever he's doing, and Mum's out there. So the minute I was old enough to be able to do that, and of course for me, it was great because not only was I getting to see this thing that I wasn't, meant to be included, but I was able to share this, moment and this connection with my mother. And so knowing that I was interested in those sort of things, she loved the opportunity to be able to come down to Melbourne and go and see a show or go to the theatre, whether it be a musical or whatever it is. But I do think, because at this point, if I'm remembering this right, and I may not be, because so many of my memories get molded into each other for the convenience of making the story sound good. So,
Disclaimer up front.
I'm a storyteller, not a documentarian. But the way that I've told it and the way that I think it happened is that I had already decided at that point that I was going to do journalism at university. And so if she was a person who wanted to rule out my dreams of these other things, there was a really clear opportunity to just not encourage it anymore because I had decided to go in a different direction.
Yeah.
And the fact that she took me, and I remember being in that room that night and just feeling, there was something. I mean, it's as close as a person who's not religious, have to go.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I just knew.
Yeah.
And it's okay to say now.
Yeah.
Like back then, it's ridiculous. So you're like, what do you think? Of course, you're looking at one of the greatest comedians who's ever lived, and you're sitting there in the audience going, I reckon I could do this. You know what I mean? Like but there was just a part of my brain that kind of was like, I think I could work out, not maybe just how to do this, but this world, whatever this is, whatever is happening right now, there was people from age 10 to age 80, all just like, the thing I love the most about live comedy is this idea that there are all these people in the foyer who, if they locked the doors and said talk to each other, they would not know where to start. They wouldn't, they wouldn't know what they have in common. They get into a room, they sit down, and this man comes out and starts talking, and they all are laughing at the same thing. They're all connected in this moment. And I knew that feeling, whatever that was, I was like, I got to be around this. And so I went to university, and I didn't do any theatre. I didn't do like university reviews, but I kept going to watch comedy. So whenever there was like a Wednesday night comedy night at the Private Bin, which was this it was a comedy gig that in retrospect, oh my God, it must have been horrible for the comedians because it was like the local FM DJ would come out and throw T-shirts into the audience, and everyone had got in for like $5 and $10 worth of drinks or whatever it was. But I would go and watch it regularly. And whenever comedy came to town, like big acts like a Ben Elton or whoever might be the big touring acts of the time, I would always be the one out of my social group. No one else was really going, we're going to go to this comedy thing. They were like, we'll go and see this band or we'll go drinking, but we're not going to, drop our drinking money on going to see Ben Elton. But I was always the person who would go, and quite often go like alone. And I know that there was just a part of me in my brain that was watching it and enjoying it, but also always watching it in that sense of how is this working? What's going on,
Did you ever get to meet Billy Connolly?
Yes, I've met him. Did you
share that story?
So I don't know how much of this story I can tell you all. I'll tell you the good. I can't tell you it all, but I can give you the gist, which is, so Adam Spencer and I were doing the radio show together, and Billy Connolly was promoting a movie called The Man Who Sued God. And it was one of those, you'd understand what it is. It's a hotel. There's 2 hotel rooms, so that one media organization sets up in one room while the person's being interviewed in the other room, and then they walk into the other hotel room, get interviewed in that one, while the other radio station sets up in the other hotel, and that's how they do the press junket all day. So he's doing one of those.
You got a really tight window of time,
10 minutes max, and from the minute he walks in, sits down, and then
it's game on.
Then it's game on, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm not going to waste time that we have to do this thing. I'm not going to make this about
self-indulgent. Do you think
right?
if you're going to tell my story,
right?
Yeah.
So didn't mention it. Our interview was the last one before lunch. So at the end of our interview, he came in after a whole morning of things and sat down and got into it. But at the end, while we were just finishing up, he was still there, and Adam went over. It's actually one of the most generous and lovely things a person has done. Went over to Billy and just kind of said, "Hey, this guy that I work with is like one of the like an emerging, Australian comedian, but you are his absolute hero, and the reason he does comedy is because of you, and blah blah blah." And so Billy comes over, and because he was about to go to lunch, he had a bit of a chat and like had a little bit of time to like have a talk to me, and then he says, "Hey, I'm about to go to this lunch, but it's a press lunch. Like I'm like just the guest, and there's going to be a whole bunch of press there for the lunch. Would you like to come?" Triple J didn't get the invites to the press lunch, but he invited us both. But Adam had to go back to the studio to do with what he had, the equipment and everything else. He said, "I'll come back," but he said, "You go." And so I went, and I went into the room, and I was like, "Well, this is, of course, cool. Of course I'll come, of course." Anyway, there's a seat next to Billy that he has left for me. Now, at the time, I did not understand this. This is like Richard Wilkins and Angela Bishop and, like the Australian icon sort of entertainment celebrities, around the table. But there's this seat next to Billy that has been reserved for me. I understand it now, absolutely, which is if I were in that same situation and I knew there was a young comedian there rather than the entertainer, I absolutely, that's who I'd want to sit next to and talk to. And I remember ringing my mum immediately afterwards, after the lunch, and telling her just, what had happened, that I'd met him and that we'd end up going to lunch. And she said to me, what did you ask him about? And I said, here's the amazing thing. I said, I barely got an opportunity to ask him about anything, because for the entire hour, he was just asking me about what's it like to be a young comedian. Like, what are you doing? Like, what's the, blah, blah, blah. We're talking about gigs we're doing. And I made him laugh, telling a story that I can't tell you on your podcast. You'd have to beep it too much. But the sort of story that comedians tell each other to make each other laugh.
You can tell the story, mate. You have to tell the story now.
Well, so this is a story that I told Billy Connolly. This is an absolutely true story. You can beep what you need to beep. It's fine. We were talking about best heckles, which is like obviously a thing that comedians, when they're talking to each other.
When you catch up, is that a sort of common thing to go?
Gigs gone wrong, best heckle, something that people's yelled at you, that sort of thing, right? And this combines all those elements, this story. I told him a true story that happened actually not far from where we are today. It happened at the SB Hotel in St Kilda. There was a terrible tragedy in Australia, the Port Arthur massacre, terrible tragedy. I'm not going to make fun of it, but a couple of days after that tragedy. So this is obviously before social media. These days, the darkest jokes would be made on social media. But in those days, the darkest jokes about any tragedy are being made at your local comedy club in the days afterwards. And so there was a particular comedian that day, who I won't name, but he was attempting to do comedy about that terrible tragedy that had literally only happened days before. Fair to say, was not going well. Like, the audience, even in a comedy room, the audience was
just missed the mark.
Yeah, it was. This is not. Yeah. No one's here for this, right?
Yeah.
So this guy in the audience yells out, "Oh, come on, mate! That's not fair. My brother died at Port Arthur," and so now the room is like there's booing. There's like people are like. Now, if you think about that for 1 second, you realize, of course, that is a lie, right? Like, no one's brother dies at Port Arthur 2 days earlier and someone says, you know what, I'll take my mind off this?
See Wil Anderson.
Open mic stand-up at the SB Hotel, you know what I mean? Like, of course. But it was such a terrible, because you can't in the moment. Yeah, so it just ruined they had to literally shut down the first half, took a big break, restart the second half, new audience in, which is basically what used to happen anyway. Everything's going fine. There is, and now this is the bit you'll definitely have to beep, but there is a comedian on stage who is using the C word constantly. The whole idea of his routine is to demystify this word. So the more that you use it, the more it's meant to demystify this word. So he's saying, see this, see that, see this, see that. And then from up the back of the SB through the door, you just hear this guy yell out, "Oh, come on, mate, that's not fair. My brother's a..."
and they got a laugh from Billy.
So I tell Billy Connolly this story, and he laughs like so hard, in a way. And this is where this story. And so one of the great entertainment reporters in Australia is Richard Wilkins, and I have met Richard many times. He's been great to me, but I need to respect this story by telling it to you exactly how it happened. So Richard has heard Billy do this big laugh, has leaned in, not knowing what the context is, and gone, "Oh, tell us another one, Billy. And Billy Connolly leans back, puts his arm over his face to hide it, and just looks at me and goes, "What a cockhead." And that moment was like, I mean, to this day, honestly, one of those, I mean, you're just like, it's a lovely thing to meet someone who is a hero of yours. But in that moment, it just felt like we were two comics at the back of the room, two friends sharing, a moment and sharing a joke.
It's a great story, and they say never meet your heroes, but in that's generous, isn't it?
Yeah.
You understand fully why he did it. I want to jump into that for a moment because I'm curious about this because I love your sense of humour and I love comedy, not in a way that you do, but to me, it's the last bastion of being able to be anti-politically correct. And I don't see how you can take offence, regardless of what's said, that now we've seen this sort of era, like a Ricky Gervais or a Dave Chappelle. They say outrageous things because that's what part of comedy is. I'm surprised when people are offended. How do you feel about that? Is there a line now where you just can cross it and you can't come back?
It's such a complicated topic because there's no black or white answer to this, and that's the problem because that's all people want.
Yeah.
People want it to be a yes or a no. So let's just take Ricky Gervais as an example, right? So you have Ricky Gervais, whose whole act is to be shocking. Like that is what he does. That's the area in which his comedy works. It's not like suddenly Jerry Seinfeld or Carl Barron is coming out and saying the things that Ricky Gervais says. This is his act. So you know what it is. It's always been what it is. But then there is that idea of sometimes I think these people who are in those positions, Chappelle, or they are saying things that they want to offend people, but then they get mad when people are offended by things they have said to be offensive.
Yeah.
So then you have them going on tour. Ricky Gervais had the highest selling comedy tour of last year. So he's not being cancelled. Like, in fact, he's being rewarded for being so good at what he does.
Yeah.
So it's so complicated, right? Because you've got both somebody saying something intentionally to be provocative, people being offended and talking to be cancelled, then a reaction to that from people who are going, "No, I love this. You can't say anything anymore." And I'm going to do my tour saying you can't say anything anymore. And it's going to sell out stadiums all over the world and being the highest selling topic. I think that comedy at its best is reactive to the times in which it exists. And it's why often comedy doesn't date that well because you are making comedy about, when you are making comedy about the 60s, you're using terms or perspectives or whatever that you would use in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s or whatever it might be. But as it develops, and often the other thing about comedy is that even if you go back and look at some of the greats, if you go back and look at, Carlin or like Lenny Bruce, these people who invented modern day stand-up comedy, some of it can feel very slow or unfunny by modern day sensibilities because, of course, they are the building blocks that have then been used by every single comedian who's come into in the same way as if you went back and watched a game of, VFL football from 50 or 60 years ago, by modern day standards, even the greatest of players look cumbersome or they just, I was even the other night I was watching the pre-game in the football and they were doing shirts versus skins and every footballer now is just ripped and has 12 packs and stuff. And I was like, in the old days, there was a few blokes who wouldn't have wanted to take their tops off before the games. And there is always an evolution. What I know to be true is that I think in comedy, it is, you can still pretty much say whatever you want. I think in broader society, you can't necessarily say whatever you want anymore because humor in those senses is contextual, in all senses, right? Yeah. There are things that I would happily say within the confines of my stand-up show in a room full of people who've been there all night. Look, there's a person in the entertainment industry who recently went through a cancellation for something that they said and that I know.
Well, it's Marty Sheargold. He's a friend of both of ours and a colleague of both of ours.
That's right.
And so how do you feel about that?
So the thing about for example, and I hope this is not speaking out of confidence, I've been in contact with Marty and he's philosophical about the idea that if you live by the sword, you die by the sword.
Yeah.
But if you work in that area where if you know Marty's shtick, it's all like that, right? So from day to day, whether it be the Matildas or whether it be you or I, if our names came up on his program or whatever, that his humor is to be provocative, to be intentionally counter to what everybody else thinks, to push buttons. If you do that sort of humor, it comes with a risk, which is that when it is taken out of context and written down, it looks pretty rank. And it can look like you have some terrible
was having got
opinions.
women's sport, having got the Australian national soccer team.
I think one of the lines that got highlighted was also that he didn't believe that endometriosis was real. In a million years, I can't imagine that Marty Sheargold really thinks that he does not believe that endometriosis.
Of course he doesn't.
Right?
Well, of course he doesn't.
And that's the joke. The joke is that he's saying something that, of course, like everybody knows is true, and he's saying it's not, therefore that is the humour.
So you're allowed to find that
Yes.
not funny, of course,
Yes.
and you're allowed to switch off and change channels.
Yes.
But then that next level is a grey area, and I can understand. You're in the car with a daughter or someone that's I totally get.
This is where context comes in, right? And so this is that idea of, could Marty put on the Marty Sheargold comedy show, or the comedians? He goes on tour with Pangy and Mick and Lawrence Mooney. I mean,
you know what you're signing up for.
I was going to say that Matilda's gear would be the least offensive thing that you would hear in the night, I'd imagine, because the context of that event is
and you know what
this is what we're doing. The problem with broadcast and why you can get in trouble when it comes to broadcast media is that it's not like a podcast or something where you think, well, you downloaded this. This is on you, whether you like it or not. And so a lot more of that material now lives in those spaces of pay-per-view or direct-to-consumer. Like, I mean, Louis C.K., who famously got cancelled for bad behaviour, not bad material, but has rebuilt his entire career, and really you don't see him anywhere, but he direct to his consumers. They buy his albums, they go and see his shows. He does what he does, and it doesn't need to exist anywhere else but there now.
Yeah. Have you ever said something you regret?
Heaps. All the time. And I mean, Jimmy Carr, the comedian, and who works in, that kind of more offensive area as well, his big thing is the thing you're going to get cancelled for, you've already said, which is probably more likely to be true, because by the way that we evolve as a society, there would have been things that you said at some point that you wouldn't have even thought were offensive, terms you'd use, ways you'd speak about a topic, whatever it might be, that by today's standards, you look back on and think, oh, that isn't.
Well, I was lucky enough to work with you for a couple of years and do radio, and if you probably replayed that show now, there's stuff that would definitely be completely off the reserve. That's how quickly the world's moved in the space of a decade, in my mind. But I was going to ask, because I always used to look at you in the morning across the desk, and I used to think, I just got to talk about the footy. I got to talk about what's coming up. And I used to think, geez, Wil turns up at 6 a.m. and he's dialed on to be funny. And I used to think that must be a stressful thing to come into a room. It's what your whole life is, I suppose. But is there an element of stress that comes with that? You go, geez, what if you're having an off day?
I mean, the period of time we worked together was like because that show, it had a lot of moving parts anyway. So comedically, it is like an extra challenge, right? Like it isn't a comedy show. It isn't set up to serve comedy. Like, I mean, there are spaces within it where comedy can live and exist, but they're not
tailor-made for your world. So
it's not my conditions. It's not like it's not the perfect conditions that I was like, when I'm putting the comedy festival show together, I go, you know what, we should call Das and Ed as well and see if they want to.
Waiting for that call, Wil. I thought I might have been your wingman up there at the Fringe Festival in Adelaide, but apparently not.
But that was a period of time in my life where like some things were a bit tougher just in my life as well.
Yeah.
And so absolutely do those things affect you, probably more than you acknowledge at the time, and I'm sure you've been through it in your career as well, where periods of time where you've been challenged by something that isn't to do with your direct work and you think that you are carrying it fine or hiding it from everybody or at least being able to kind of present up and do your best. The truth of it is that perhaps, in general, I think people can tell a little bit more than perhaps you would think that they can, and I think that you probably I certainly know. I'll just speak rather than speaking generally. I'll just speak specifically, which is I know now that I am in a better place to be able to perform my work. I realise how often that there was a heaviness from life that sometimes would make it a little more difficult to do the job. But also, it's the job is the job. And the audience, the people you're doing the job for, they don't actually give a shit how your day was or what's going on in your life. They just would like you to do your job so that they can be amused, or like they're going to their job. They need you to rock up. And in some ways, there's a very famous Barry Humphries quote. Someone asked him once about what it was like, as Dame Edna to walk out in front of 3,000 people. What went through his mind when he was out there? And he said, alone at last. And that's not exactly how I feel, because I always feel like when I am doing comedy, I'm in a conversation with both the people I'm in, like an actual conversation with, and a conversation with the audience as well. But I do think there is an element of comedy that you have to be so present, or at least when you're being your best at it, you are so present that it can be a relief from your life, because it is not one of those jobs. I imagine if you had a repetitive factory style job, let's just say, and something really big's going on in your life, you could be there working your job and also not being able to block out this horrible thing that is going on, just going over and over in your head. And I think that would be so hard to deal with. For my job, at least for that hour a day, or a couple of hours a day, I have to be able to go, all right, you just have to listen. You have to pay attention. You have to be as present as you can possibly be. And so sometimes when you are going through a bad time, or if you had a bad day, or I remember seeing Tom Gleeson perform. His father had died during the comedy festival, and he was going to cancel his run, but it was going to be too hard to cancel, him. And so I went along that night just to sit in the wings and, be supportive if needed, here if you need, the old netball philosophy. And I remember watching him do the show and just thinking, oh, what a great show he's done tonight. Like, it was really brilliant. You wouldn't have known that, he was dealing with the fact that his father had just died. And of course, I understand it, which is that it probably was a great relief to just go out there and at least for 1 hour not have to think about that, to have to think about what was in front of him, knowing that as soon as it finished, you have to go back to the reality of your life.
And that was my observation of you, the admiration, and working with Mick Malloy for many years too, just the ability to do it was the admiration. I never ever felt like you're in a bad place at all. I didn't, I understood you had some personal challenges going on as life does to all of us. I was thinking of the great legendary Shane Warne, one of the greatest sports people. The more chaos in his personal life, the more relief he seemed to find by being out there and able to do the thing that he was better at than most people.
We all are born different. As we grow, the experiences we have develop into outlooks uniquely our own, charting our life's course. No one sees an idea, opinion, or opportunity like you. And no one sees you like VU. Victoria University. Uniquely you.
At Aleda, our signature program, Aleda Connect, is something we're really passionate and proud of. We bring together groups of 5 to 6 people around the globe from diverse backgrounds, sport, industry, social venture and the arts, who come together to learn, to connect and to collaborate.
The thing that I've loved about it is not just the meetings that we have with our group, it's the thinking that you do for days and days afterwards. Someone says something and it sparks a thought, and I found that I would go back and look at things that I was doing in a different light. Within my sport and within women's sport, I'm just someone who I try to lead by keeping people talking about the issues. There's times when I think the person I'm trying to convince is not listening to me. It actually got me thinking about, okay, this is how I need to address my communication with them. So it was so valuable, and the little group that we've got is great, and I'm really looking forward to sort of continuing to connect with them into the future, because we're all so very different. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed it.
You've also had to deal with your life with osteoarthritis, and you talk about it in your comedy a fair bit. It got you arrested off a plane once, which you turned into a sellout comedy festival as well. Is that something? I mean, humour aside, is that something that you have to deal with every day? It's a burden.
It's something I have to deal with every day, but is it a burden? I don't know. Like I am very philosophical about the idea that life comes with a vast array of challenges. And, I am lucky in many ways. I mean, I always think if you are born in Australia, in a general sense. There are absolute, obviously, exceptions to that rule, particularly disadvantaged First Nations people. But, but let's just say if you were going to be born anywhere in the world, if you were born in Australia, you've already, your tickets, you've got a few tickets in the lottery already just from that. To have been raised in the way I have an education, have opportunities, so many of things in my life, I'm really grateful for. The osteoarthritis has been a challenge, and there has been points in my life where it has been so debilitating that, yes, it was overwhelming. But it is also something that you can just change your lifestyle and manage, in some ways. So when we were doing the radio show, so it basically got to the point where my doctor had said, look, there are people who have had both of their hips replaced who had better hips than you have when they went in to do them. So at any point from now on that you feel like it is the time to get it done, because I was first diagnosed in my early 30s and I'm now 51. So what they wanted me to do, which was hold on for as long as I can, I think I've well and truly done that.
And you haven't had them done.
And so he said to me, well, so in 2018, 2019 or whatever it would have been, he said to me, maybe in the next, so on. And so my plan was, part of the reason that I'd kind of agreed to do the radio was, in my profession, I'm a freelancer.
Yeah.
So I don't get sick pay or holiday pay or any of those sort of things. If I don't work, I don't pay for things.
Yeah.
And the risk of not just being off my feet for the 6 weeks, which is the hopefully you get your
Best
6
case
weeks in best
scenario.
case.
Yeah.
But what happens if I'm like my friend who had complications and had to get it done 3 times and was on a cane for a year? That's tough for me.
Yeah.
So my thought was, I'll get myself a bit fit and right during that time. I've got this job. Worst case scenario, a job that they could set up a microphone and I could do from bed if I needed to do it,
Yeah.
And then, of course, that finished up. COVID happened. My life, I had some personal changes as well. And so I'm back in a position where I probably don't have that financial kind of a buffer, I guess is the way I would put it, to be able to roll the dice on taking that risk at the moment.
Yeah.
And so what that means is you have to find other ways to manage what you do. So for me, that's very much like lifestyle and management.
Yeah.
So no alcohol, that's probably the biggest one. I hate that.
So you're not drinking?
At all. Haven't for nearly 3 years.
Really?
Wow. Actually, I say I'm a 10 drinks a year guy now, because if I'm at a wedding, I'll have a glass of champagne.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? For the toast. But that's literally what it is.
Yeah.
And that has been, I wish that it weren't the best thing that has ever happened in regard to my hips, but it is the best thing that's ever happened.
Made a massive difference, has it?
2 things that I say. Firstly, the swelling, just the swelling from but I still eat a lot of other things in my diet that, I'm still eating bread and all sorts of things that you could cut.
Yeah.
But it's the body consciousness, the idea of not sitting down longer than you should have sat down, or moving in ways that you're not, or just being sore but not acknowledging it because your pain's been dulled by having the drinks or whatever it might have been. So just being more aware of when I need to stretch, when I need to walk, and then just putting that into my life, keeping moving. Because the biggest thing with osteoarthritis is you've just got to move. As long as you keep moving. So
and
today,
you do that. You're a big walker, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, today we're doing this. This is about 40 minutes walk from my house where we are today. And so I walked in here and I'll walk home. Yeah. So that'll be my thing of going, great. I walk for 40 minutes. We'll talk for an hour and a half. I'll walk home for 40 minutes.
And you just bank that into your life.
That's my day.
Yeah.
I just do that all day long. For whatever it is that I need to do, I think about, instead of going to the lounge when I go to the airport, if I've got an hour before my flight, I just have a walk around the airport, put my headphones on and just go and so it's just simple things like that. And to be honest, I feel pretty good. I think my pain around my hips is probably better than it was a decade ago. They'd be much, if you looked at an x-ray of them, they would look much worse than they did a decade ago, but I feel much better.
So you're 51 years of age, Wil, and to me, everything that you do professionally turns to gold, and you have done that from the youngest possible age. But what does a successful life mean to Wil Anderson?
Yeah, it's a question that I'm really interested in, and interested in even more as you realize that your time to, if there is something that you haven't done, that is really important to you, you do realize that it goes very quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, a blink of an eye and you're just like, what happened? Where did that go? Like, when I was 21, 22 years old, I left journalism and decided that I wanted to be a stand-up comedian. And that's all I wanted to be. I wanted to do the Melbourne Comedy Festival. To me, that seemed like the biggest thing in the world, the Melbourne Comedy Festival. In retrospect, it must have been only like 5 or 6 years old, but to me it was as big as you could possibly get. One day I want to do a show at the Melbourne Comedy Festival. Next year I'll do my 30th show in 30 years at the Melbourne Comedy Festival. And so I've done that. That was what I wanted to do. And so I guess I've done that. Like I believe I won't be forever, and maybe I'm not even anymore, but there was certainly a point where I was more people had seen me do a show at the Melbourne Comedy Festival than I've ever seen anybody else do a show at the Comedy Festival. And just that to me was like, well, there you go. That's actually kind of, I feel like what I set out to achieve, I achieved. And so all that other stuff, I mean, it's so funny. You talked about Gruen being one of the most successful shows in the history of, and it kind of is. Like it really is. And it probably will be looked back on as being one of those, I mean, we've been doing it 17 years now. Like, I've been raising that show as long as my parents raised me, and I've done, various other things that have had, good levels of success, etc. But since the age of 25, when I went to Sydney to do the Triple J Breakfast Show with Adam Spencer, I have not been a full-time stand-up comedian since then. So I had Triple J, I had the Glass House, I had Triple M, I had Gruen, I had Question Everything, I had Triple M again, I had, and Triple M again, like there was books, there was columns, there was whatever. There was always something else. There's a part of me that just thinks, what could you do? Like, you've managed to do all this, you wanted to be a full-time stand-up comedian. And you've managed to do, like, I've managed to have a good stand-up comedy career, but always doing it as a part-time job. What could I do? What could I achieve? What could I make if I was just a full-time stand-up comedian? I think that's probably the itch that hasn't been scratched in my life. It's not about, I don't have big career ambitions anymore because I feel like most of the career ambitions in that sense that I had, I've kind of got to have a go at. And I'm not a person who's hugely motivated by, money, or I've always, made like much more money than I think you should make for what it is I do for a living. So I've always been, more than happy with the amount of money I've made out of it. And I don't have big expensive habits. I'm not a person who needs a lot of money coming in. And so I think the thing for me would be am I willing to let go of what other people consider to be the markers of what a successful life is? Because to others, to look externally, the idea of, say, walking away from some of the things that I do, other people would think, why? Why would you do that? These are things that that society values as being markers of somebody who is successful, and you would be intentionally
foolish to do that.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
But there's this other part of me that says, wouldn't the greatest tragedy of all be that I got so busy being successful at things that my heart wasn't in, that I never fully committed myself to the thing that my heart is in? And what's the point of having people wanting to come and see you if you don't have the time to fully commit to what it is? And to me, that's not even necessarily about big things. I've started to implement them. This year, as you know, I've been doing more shows, but in smaller venues, of my improvised stand-up show. And part of that is about that idea of going, no, my priority now is stand-up again. Because the thing about the improv show in particular is I can't do anything else on the day of it. When I'm doing my regular touring show, what eventually happens is your days, now, if I've got 1,000 or 2,000 people coming to see me do a show at night, Das, if you're playing a game of footy at night, I imagine the team would prefer your whole day is kind of around, eat something at the right time, blah, blah, blah.
You're not doing a paper round in the morning.
Yeah, you're not working a full day's job and then just rocking, but that's what I do a lot of the time when it comes to my touring show. Whereas when I'm doing this improv show, because it is more demanding and you have to be better, I've actually been starting to value my day and my time and keep it separate. And part of that is just about reprioritizing both because it has to start with me. If I'm not saying to people, this is important, this is my number one priority, then how can I expect other people are going to value it in that way either? So it has to start with me. I've been having this conversation out loud a lot in the hope that, and look, for years, honestly, and there is a point where if I don't do something about it, I'm going to stop having the conversation because I'm like, I don't want to be that guy who's always talking about it. But I don't want to just go back to stand up full time. I want to do it at a point where I could still have that be the next act of my life.
Yeah.
And that can't be 55. That can't be 60. Because if I do it then, it's just going to be physically and mentally too late to like kind of do what it is I want to do. So a successful life for me, that's the one box I haven't fully checked yet. And I think that's the one that if I got to the end of, as I always joke to my management, I said, I've already done enough for my in memoriam at the Lakers. Like they've already got enough. They've already got enough stuff to roll through that. You know, I don't need, you know.
Well, that's a good reason to say it out loud, isn't it? Because it sort of forces your hand a bit, doesn't it? If you say it to enough people, then eventually you're going to follow through and do it. I love asking these questions, Wil, and sitting across from you or Ben Northey from the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra or an educated or someone from a different background. There's patterns of what we think successful people have in common, and the idea that you sort of got to fill your own cup up first before you can go out there and have success. What's that mean for you? What do you do to fill your own cup up? Yeah,
it's something that I think you've just not only got to fill your own cup up, but I think particularly when it comes to being a comedian, and like this improv show, part of the reason that I've loved doing it is because it does have a more philosophical, practical philosophical aspect to it as well, which is literally if I'm going to do a new show every night, my cup or my bucket, as I refer to it, needs to be filled to overflowing every day because I do not know what I'm going to need from that bucket.
Yeah.
I've got to get everything.
Yeah.
But I can't, the one thing it can't be is empty.
Yeah.
The one thing it can't be is it's got whatever was in it yesterday because I've already used all that stuff, you know? And so that idea of doing something new without knowing specifically when it's going to be used later, which is so tough, right? Yeah. Because we live in this society where we want to see immediate value from what it is that we do. Mm. I want to be able to go and do this thing and know that I will be immediately able to use this. Like I've filled up the bucket and I'll be able to immediately use the thing in the bucket, but it doesn't work like that. The problem is that you've got to constantly be filling it and not knowing, just trusting that that is the right thing to do. Obviously, one of the real passions for me at the moment is live experience. And I want to kind of examine why that is the case. I think partly it's a response to the current world that we live in, which is that, so many of our experiences are meant not for the moment that they're in, but to be broadcast and shared by other people later who aren't there. That's the world that we now live in, as opposed to the idea of a moment being just uniquely for us right now. And I understand the irony of saying that on a podcast, but I think that for me, then it's about, okay, if I'm interested in why live performance is important, the best way for me to work that out is to go to live performance. And so without prejudice, comedy shows, theatre, interviews, sports, things that have crowds, that have audiences, I've just been going to.
Really?
That's me filling my bucket.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm going to learn from Cold Chisel or from Graham Norton or from, whoever it might be. The magic show that I went, Abracadabra Bitch, that I went and saw at the, Adelaide Fringe Festival. I don't know what I'm going to learn from those experiences, but I bet I am. I'm going to learn something.
Yeah.
There's that, obviously, that old thing of like we talk about filling the cup, There is another way of looking at it, which is right. Like, so there's one way of looking at like a show, which is like, there's your cup and you got to like your cup. I say show, I mean life show, whatever, whatever it might be. in that you are just getting a little bit, and filling it up, and then that becomes your cup. Or there's a famous, I think it's Michelangelo was asked about the sculpture, like making sculptures, and he goes, you've got to find which bits to get rid of. The sculpture's already in there, right? So I think that like you've got your big block of marble, and then your show or your life becomes what you chip away from the block of marble. You can't just build it to purpose. You can't just have a map and go, here it is, and then find all those bits. What you've got to do is build yourself a big block of marble, right? And then once you've built the block of marble, chip away the stuff that doesn't need to be there to find what it is that you need to find within there.
I saw the statue of David 2 months ago in person, and that you look at that and that makes no sense at all. The size and the scale, and with a piece of one mistake, that doesn't work. But that's a great way of, and doesn't surprise me with you that you do that in such a unique way. What's the one thing that's worked for you and you'd attribute to your success that you'd never change?
I'm definitely not one of those people who think that everything was better in the olden days, or that my way of doing things is the best way of doing things. I probably learn more from new people than I learn from old people. And I think that's actually something that the biggest trap I see people falling into is this idea of thinking that the old way is the only way or is the best way. I mean, I think there is also an opposite of that, which is that young people come along and think that nothing that has come before has any relevance and history shouldn't be, studied or, whatever it might be. But I do think that there is a certain point you get to, particularly in my life, where people stop wanting to learn new things. Yeah. And I've always wanted to learn new things. I've always been curious. I don't see myself as a particular expert in things. And so I think that idea of like a humble curiosity, a willingness to learn, these are all part of the same thing, to not judge somebody for not knowing something that you just learned, which is one of the biggest things. The other one is really simple, which is growing up on a farm. One of the things you really learn from growing up on a farm is the cows need to be milked every day. You just can't be like, I don't feel like it today. Oh, and by the way, they need to be milked at the same time because that's how their bodies work. You can't just sleep in for 2 hours. And so
what happens to a cow if you don't milk it on time?
Well, it's in pain. Like it's not good. I mean, because obviously the milk expands to a certain point and needs to come out at a certain time. That's their cycle, right? So you need to be doing that to continue the process. That idea of and tomorrow, and also the other thing you learn about farming growing up is you can be the hardest working farmer. You can get up at the same time every day and milk your cows and do everything. And then there can be a drought, or there can be a flood, or there can be a storm, or whatever else it might be that is completely without your control, and you're going to have to deal with that as well. And so I think coming into my industry, having grown up seeing that when things come along, when you lose a job that you weren't expecting to lose, or if a thing doesn't go the way that you would want it to go, or whatever it might be, you realize that, oh, well, that's just, I mean, my mum and dad, when they first started out by themselves, there was a severe drought and they had to, in a humane way, essentially dispose of their entire herd. And it was one of the more heartbreaking things for a young couple to ever go through. And I, didn't know it when I was a child, because of course I was a child, but like hearing them, speak about it as adults, how close they were to sort of tossing the whole thing in. And you just realize that, it's really, I mean, we're all going to be challenged constantly, And if it's in that idea of just going, well, I've just got to get up again and milk the cows again tomorrow, and I've got to get up again and milk the cows tomorrow, and sometimes there'll be droughts and sometimes there'll be floods.
That curiosity part I want to ask you about it. I'm assuming that's essential to what you do, but we see that with people who are successful, they're inherently curious. Do you carve out time in your day for that curiosity so you can implement, like you say, is that part of it, going to a show to be curious and you don't know how that's going to be implemented?
Yeah. What I've got better at is listening without prejudice. So I think that you can almost overstimulate your curiosity in that you try to work everything out, or you can't enjoy it anymore. Everything becomes like homework. Yeah. There was a period of time where I couldn't see comedians, and I still, if I want a night off, I'll go and see a comedian who's more like in my style, or at least in my world, when I'm not in the middle of a comedy season. If I'm in the middle of a comedy season and I'm going to go and see another comedian, it tends to be someone who does something very far removed from what it is that I do, because my brain doesn't go into homework mode. It can just enjoy and be curious about, oh, I wonder how they do that, right?
So if you're listening to another comedian, you're in the middle of a series of shows.
Yeah. I could. Well, if I went and saw, I mean, let's just use Dave Hughes as an example, right? Someone who, like, if I went and saw Hughesy while I was doing Comedy Festival, my brain would be like, oh, I can see what he's doing there. Oh, I wonder where here. I wonder if I give him a punchline for this. You know, it's homework rather than entertainment.
Yeah.
Whereas if someone was a step away from what I do, I went and saw a magic show in Adelaide partly because sometimes it's nice to go and see something that just isn't quite what I do that I can.
Yep.
But I think for me, what I've realized is that sort of intense curiosity can be exhausting. So the biggest one for me is one thing at a time. We live in a world where everything wants you to multitask. I mean, as you would know, there has been a lot of very good research around how ineffective multitasking actually is and how we fool ourselves to think that we are like multitasking at a level that we are absolutely not multitasking. So we think we listened to that podcast, but we were reading the news website at the same time, and it turns out not much of either went in, right? We think we did both. We actually did neither.
Yeah.
What I have started doing a lot is one thing at a time. Yeah. And I've found that's incredible for my curiosity, because that is a level where I can say, okay, this is all I am doing right now is this. So I'm not thinking about anything other than this. I'm thinking about, so Graham Norton last night at his show, for example, I'm like, I'm able to watch it and go, oh, what's the audience like here? Look over there at that, because I'm not on my phone like talking to my mate or whatever before the show. I'm in the room now. I've sat down in the room. Here I am. How's the stage set up? What is it beforehand? I wonder if why he doesn't bring his own drink out and set like that. I wonder who these people are down the front. Gee, this is a beautiful venue. I like how it's like sloped up like this. I was really admiring the venue last night and the construction of it in a way that I'd never really looked at before. And partly that was from the minute I went inside the building last night at Hamer Hall, I turned off my phone. As soon as the tickets were,
consciously turned off.
And just went, that's it.
Yeah.
Now I'm here.
Yeah.
And I'm going to, take on the train, if I'm going home on the train, so often I will just say, don't put on your headphones. Yeah. Just have a look. Just stand here and just look. Look at what people are doing. Look at what's going on the train. Have some awareness of the situation you're in. So I guess it's what, people would call mindfulness or being in the moment or whatever. Yeah. But I try to do that rather than that being a practice that I might do for 20 minutes a day, I try to be that something that I'm doing consciously throughout my day. And, they say sometimes about diet, one of the big things is, if you're trying to get your kids to eat something nutritious, it's not about their entire diet. It's just about adding something nutritious to something they'll already eat. Put some broccoli in the pasta sauce, And I think often I don't know who the fashion person, it was Donatella Versace or someone like that, right? One of those famous people was their biggest fashion tip was before you go out of the house, look in the mirror and take one thing off. And I do think that when I'm out in public or I'm at an experience, we are so, everywhere we are now, someone is somewhere else. Yeah. They're not there, they're on their phone or they're whatever, they're somewhere else. You'll even sit down with somebody and they're somewhere else. I'm trying my best to be present. And if you are present, then curiosity is almost impossible not to be curious if you are present, right? Because your brain is going, oh, who's this? What's this? What's going on here? What's the temperature? What are the noises happening? Anything. It has to. Yeah,
it's brilliant, isn't it? It has to be a practice now, doesn't it? Because it's so easily distracted. We don't even realise it. You sit in bed with Beck and you're both, engaged in something else and the TV's going and
you forget that these things are weaponized against us. I mean, the big thing I always say to everyone's frustration, but it is my motto, which is my phone is for my convenience. It is not for anyone else's convenience to contact me. I don't have email or apps or anything on it. It is for whenever I need to use the phone.
So you've taken all the apps off.
All the apps off.
No social media.
No social media. I'm not on social media at all. I've taken all the apps off my phone.
all your social media?
My management run it all on my behalf now. So it still exists, but it's not me. I'm not on. I don't go into the social media because like the most valuable resource on the planet at the moment is attention. Everybody wants your attention. There are more psychologists working for advertising and internet companies like social media companies than there are in the rest of society. There was a point where getting more mobile phones out to people was the way they could grow their business, right? The more people have a device in their hand, the more people could be on Instagram or whatever it might be. But that we are now at a point in the world where
saturation.
Pretty much everyone's got one. So then if you are in the attention business, if your job is to make sure that people spend as much time as they possibly can on whatever it is that you're doing, you need people's attention, then you have to get people to spend more and more attention on your thing. And you have to be more and more extreme in the way that you get that attention. And that could be bells and lights and whistles. There's a reason that all social media looks like you walk through a casino in Las Vegas, right? Because it is
designed
based
like a poker machine.
Right, it's exactly that same technology. The best minds in the world that want to steal your attention from you. So I don't have a problem with using any of those things if you are very conscious about going, this is me using you, right? But the minute that it is demanding your attention, when it's going, hey, right?
I'm here.
Right?
That's 17 years of growing and a lot of time with Russell Howcroft coming out. But I love your discipline to do it, and it's incredibly true. I want to ask you a couple of final questions. Who's been the greatest leader in your life?
When I first started doing television in particular, so there's a guy called Ted Robinson is his name. Now, Ted is a legendary Australian comedy person in particular, but he was one of the original people at Double J when it started. And then he went into television comedy production, like shows like The Late Show, the very famous ABC comedy. So when I was a kid, 14, 15 years old, like 13, 14 years old probably, we had two TV networks when we were growing up. Southern Cross, which was the composite commercial one, and we had the ABC. Yeah. And we were an ABC family. And so the big gig was the show that I loved and really, but The Late Show, Andrew Denton's The Money or the Gun, these were the shows that I liked. And the two kind of people that I ended up working with in my life, I mean, Andrew was the original producer of Gruen, and Ted was the producer of Good News Week, which was the show that gave me my first start, and then he was the producer of the Glass House. And so had different relationships with each of them. Andrew had been a real hero of mine when I was growing up, but like we maybe didn't ever find the best rhythm. He was at the end of his presenting career. He was producing something. I was on the way up. It was kind of sometimes could be a little confrontational, but Ted for sure was like a father figure, a leader, a person who gave me advice in a way that things he said to me while we were doing it are lessons that I still quote to other people, and the one in particular always comes to mind. I use this still, like I reckon this comes up every second week. I would say this to somebody. Remember, it's everybody's day at work. Yeah. So it was one of the early lessons of being on television. I was the host of the Glass House. When you are the host of a television show, as you know, like even on the call sheet, it says the talent, right? Like there is the whole infrastructure, less so these days, but particularly in the old days, the infrastructure was all set up so that, the star of the show gets the star treatment and everybody, looks after that. And that can very easily lead to a big ego, or you treating other people with disrespect or just with not consideration. Yeah. He said to me very early on, he said, everybody here, it's their day at work. And when they go to home to their family, and their family asks them how it was their day at work, you are going to be one of the factors in whether they say it was a good day or a bad day at work. And I think that so often, like in the times when I've been at my worst, or I look back on a situation that I didn't handle how I would have liked to handle it, it's often when I've forgotten that very simple, basic thing of going, oh, come on, this. And that doesn't mean just in work situations. That can often be just out in the world, just having that extra moment of, I was been trying to let into a concert recently. It was late at night. I'd gone after my show. everybody else had been at this concert all day. It was like a festival-y sort of thing. And the woman on the door gave me a particularly hard time. And I remember my immediate thing was like, I was about to overreact, you know, like,
who I am.
it's like, because I also hadn't done anything. Like
Exactly.
I'm copying, but then I was like, just hang on a second. She's literally been here for 8 hours at a music festival on the front door. You know what? She's probably I'm guessing this isn't about me. I'm guessing what I'm getting right now is, and so my ability to negotiate that moment then into a satisfactory was really me just for a second remembering. Hang on, think of maybe why she's acting like this is her day at work, right?
Yeah,
and that bit of advice. I mean, there are many others, but that is the one that I honestly I think about still to this day so often.
And I've seen you in person with that, and value everyone on the team, and make a much better environment because of it. And you're right, it is a common pattern that I love, isn't it? That you always say in television, and it's the wardrobe and the makeup team that they get to see everyone upside and down, and you know, if they're happy and because you've given that time, it changes the whole landscape. We're a bit obsessed with collaboration and what we're doing, bringing these leaders together around the globe, and see when you bring someone with your creative genius with someone from a different background, you get to collaborate with lots of different people. Has there been someone you thought, God, whether it's the comedy world or any other of your creative passions, you thought, God, that's the person I'd love to collaborate with?
I mean, yeah, they're probably. I mean, there's a lot. Is the real answer to that? And in fact, I was joking about this to somebody recently. I did a little radio filling gig, and they were like, "Oh, would you like to do radio full time again?" And I said, "You know what I'd love?" I said, "I would love more than anything to be the filling guy who doesn't want the job. Like if I could get a reputation for if you need someone to fill a gap for 2 months." Because, you know, you bring in something else and you just need someone to do a good job who does. Because I'm very curious about collaborating with everybody.
Yeah.
Like one of my favorite things about when I'm touring a radio show is that I was in Perth, just a few weeks ago, and I ended up going like into their a couple of breakfast radio stations and doing like an hour and a half with their breakfast teams for shows that were sold out. And they're like, "Why are you here?" And I was like, "Oh, this is just kind of fun. It's like fun to work with some new people." But in the world of comedy, I guess the biggest ones of all, the ones that and this might actually seem quite weird to people, but if people haven't ever watched South Park closely, then they probably dismiss it as being like a very kind of out there kids cartoon show. But there was a period of time, you know, particularly kind of like, let's say, skip the first 5 years of South Park and maybe can skip the last 5 years. But there was a period of time in between there where I think that was the best social satire show on television. So funny. And there's a great documentary called 6 Days to Air, which is about the making of South Park, how they make the show. And so it just come off the back of, they'd literally just launched the Book of Mormon, which ended up being one of the most successful musicals in the history of musicals, right? Ended up winning a whole bunch of Tonys, etc. But this documentary series is set with the series of 8 or 10 episodes of South Park that they had to make immediately after coming off, launching the Book of Mormon. And so the way South Park works is the entire show is made from in 6 days. So from story being written, broken, voiced, drawn to air, 1 week, every week. That style of making something and collaborating with people. So Bill Hader, who people might know is a Saturday Night Live guy and then like a brilliant comedic actor, the series that the particular series that they highlight on this documentary, he's one of the writers in the team. And I watch that documentary constantly and just think, I wish I was Bill Hader in this. I wish I was the guy, not the member of the South Park team, but like the other one they've brought in to be part of their writing team for their 6 days. For this 6 days, like to me, to work on something like that where you can, take anything from society and satirize, talk about the idea of being able to say whatever it is that you want to say. But again, I got to see, so to go like full circle, many years ago in Edinburgh, Matt and Trey, the South Park guys, were doing a talk at the Edinburgh Comedy Festival. And I was lucky enough to, get a little ticket to this thing. It was only about 100 people at this thing. And they were showing bits of like South Park and talking about how it had all come together. And one of the most famous things in the history of South Park is this, like, it was this iconic moment where Tom Cruise is stuck in a closet, right? It's like an iconic, like, moment in the history of the show. But the original joke, they talked through it. They were saying the original joke was them just like saying that Tom Cruise was gay, right? And the lawyers are like, well, you can't say that. He's not. He's like, you can't like make that joke. It's like, that's defamation, etc. And they were like, okay, well, what if we're like, saying he's in the closet or blah, blah, blah. And they were like, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. And this was like over a week of them basically pitching an idea, being told, no, you can't say that. And then them eventually saying, oh, well, what if he was just like stuck in a closet and he couldn't get out of the closet? And they're like, oh, yeah, that's fine. And they're like, that is a much better joke than what they had started out with.
Yeah.
So the idea that you should be able to be completely unfettered in what it is you say, and that somehow makes comedy always better, is not right. Because the joke they eventually got to was a much better joke than the one they had started with. And the only reason it was is that they kept being told no, and they had to come up with a more creative way to execute it. So if I could ever collaborate with anyone, it would be the South Park guys. In particular, they are a team, but Trey Parker, if he was working in any other form other than comedy and cartoons, he would be considered one of the great genius writers of modern times.
Yeah.
He works on a level that, like, no one in the history of comedy, I don't think, has the strike rate and the capacity for work. So yeah, without a doubt, if I had a moment, like, I'd love to be in a room with Trey Parker working on South Park.
And having as many people around the world have been to the Book of Mormon and seen what that genius looks like on stage in that setup is just incredible. Hey, mate, it's been a great pleasure to spend some time with you. I feel privileged to be able to call you a friend, and all the things that you say, I watch you live that in everything you do. And it's your brain works in a very different way to mine. Your lifestyle is very different, but I've always admired you, from knowing you as a very young man and listening to a lot of your stuff. But great to see you going so well, mate. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, mate.